A very good morning to everyone. My name is Kylie from UN Global Compact Malaysia and Brunei, and I will be the MC for today's session. It's a pleasure to have you all here today. Before we begin, let's quickly go through some housekeeping announcements. We just want to ensure you have a pleasant experience throughout this event today. Firstly, we have a Q&A box, so if you have any questions, you may send them in, and we will respond accordingly. All internet connectivity depends on your respective locations you are connecting from. If for some reason your video or audio clarity is disrupted or lags, please check your device setting and re-log in if necessary. Also, please do note that this session will be recorded. All right, without further ado, please allow me to invite Ms. Shanta, who is the Associate Director of the program at UNGC MYB, to give an introduction to UNGC MYB. Over to you, Shanta.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kylie. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for attending this webinar. But before we are going to dive into the subject matter, I'd like to take this chance to put the climate action within a wider context of sustainability and also introducing the United Nations Global Compact Network, Malaysia and Brunei. So a bit of background about our organization. The UNGC is the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative as of today. And it is driven by the private sector and has a membership of over 18,000 companies worldwide. So it is really our focus to help businesses with their sustainability ambitions. So this all started 20 years ago and by the former Secretary General Kofi Annan. So you may wonder, like, what makes the UNGC different from the UN? Because there's also the Sustainable Development Goals. But as most of you may be aware of the Sustainable Development Goals, they're very high level and they're more policy oriented. So they may be very difficult in order for businesses to make and to understand how they can really create an impact on these SDGs. So that's why we are having a principle-based approach through the focus areas of human rights, labor, the environment, and anti-corruption in order to drive change towards the SDGs. So, as you may be aware as well, that ESG is really becoming a business imperative. And of course, when today's session will be focused mostly on the environmental and the climate aspect, but also the social and the governance aspect are becoming more important. And we see this in business trends, global business trends. For example, Malaysia's top pension fund sees the ESG as a vaccine for any crisis. And so we can really see this kind of headlines that are making the news more and more, and how sustainability is becoming a competitive advantage, in addition to the price and the quality, where before just businesses was based upon this. So the UNGC is helping actually businesses in order to position sustainability as their third value add. And as this is becoming more important in the mindset of consumers, investors, and wider stakeholder areas. So what is the challenge actually when we're talking about sustainability? And sustainability, there's a lot of different terms, there's a lot of different frameworks. And so it may be hard to actually get started onto the sustainability journey because it is an ongoing journey. There's ongoing developments within this field. So we are actually helping companies to indicate and to navigate where are the relevant frameworks, where are the relevant guidelines for them in order to meet their sustainability goals. And so we see, for example, that largely the sustainability agenda is also set by European and American standard frameworks. But of course, now here in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia, we also need to see how can we actually place this into a context and what are the most relevant frameworks for us. So this is how we actually help the businesses and our members here in order to make these sustainability decisions. So how do we actually do this? We have a wide range of different programs in order to assist our members and to implement their sustainability agenda. So we do this through different capacity building, reporting initiatives, thought leadership, research and publications, and we also avail a large range of sustainability tools and action platforms for them. And so as an SME, for example, you may wonder, is this all relevant to me? Because sustainability has mainly been driven by the large organizations, by the public listed companies, and also by the MNCs. However, for SMEs as well, sustainability is becoming more important, especially if we're taking it from a supply chain approach. So hence, we make sure that all of the programs and the capacity building that we are doing is relevant across different sectors and also across different company sizes. So when we are implementing this kind of capacity building programs or different type of workshops that we are doing, we are focused on the SDG ambition benchmarks. Sorry, I know I'm throwing a lot of terms in here, but the SDG ambition benchmarks, they are different from the SDGs because, as mentioned before, SDGs are very focused on policy level, and the ambition benchmark are making it more relevant to business. And so that you have a clearer kind of pathway on how you can improve your sustainability whilst contributing to the sustainability development goals. So this SDG ambition benchmarks, this is something that serves as like the sustainability compass for businesses. So we are helping all of our members in order to achieve those benchmarks. So in Malaysia, also our membership network is largely expanding. So some of our members include Bursa Malaysia, Sunway, EcoWorld, HSBC, but as well from the global members, we have the big companies such as Unilever, Nestle, and Shell, Tesco, etc. And so by becoming a member from the Malaysia and Brunei network, you will also have access to all of those global benefits, because in the end, what's the good thing about the UNGC is that we have a large global network that we can leverage on. So as mentioned, what is it actually that we do? And sustainability thought leadership engagements. And we are having different kind of like peer-to-peer sessions as well. And sometimes we also have specific programs that are focused on an industry. And there's also examples of how Malaysian companies can be a champion and to engage into global events. So we also have accelerator programs. Just an example, recently we started the Climate Ambition Accelerator Program, which is a 7-month running program in which we have different type of sessions of doing e-learning and also having facilitated and coaching sessions. So actually, how do you take all of this knowledge and how do you implement it within your organization? And so all of these tools and action plans can help you to advance your sustainability agenda. So just further examples of some of our flagship programs. This year, this is the second year that Go ESG ASEAN is running. So this is an annual event. And we have our very high level guest speakers. For example, the former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon was there. And we also have CFO Global Task Force, for example. And in order to really leverage on this global knowledge and expertise that is all captured within the UNGC. I'd like to focus on this point as well a bit, because when we're talking about sustainability, sometimes it may be very challenging in order to really, how do you create a sustainable culture? Because often it is the CEOs, in larger organizations, there is a CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer, that is employed in order to really drive the sustainability agenda. But then if your employees do not understand what is sustainability really about, and how do you get your other leaders within your company to understand what sustainability and why it matters, why they should be involved in this. So this is why the UNGC has a digital learning library. So for all our members, it is giving them unlimited access for all of their staff and employees. So in that way, you can also really drive this kind of cultural transformation within the organization. Here's another example of some of our accelerator programs. So as mentioned, we had the Climate Ambition Accelerator programs. We also have other focus programs on gender equality and also sustainability practitioner certification program, and that we have developed together with our knowledge partners. So this is an example of some of a localized sustainability content. So a module toolkit, this is a kind of working toolkit and that is specifically adjusted for the Malaysian context. And it is also most relevant to SMEs. And because we do understand, especially in Malaysia, SMEs are playing such an important role to drive the economy. And so this is specifically for them. And another example is the Climate Action Guides. Please feel free to visit the website. I know that my colleague is sharing the resources, the links to the resources within the chat box. So please feel free to visit all of these toolkits. So this is an example of our tools and action plans, gender gap analysis tool, sustainable procurement, and this is all within the SDG ambition benchmark. So with that, and I would like to give the mic back to Kylie so that we can go further within the focus on the SBTIs. And please feel free to contact us for any further questions or inquiries. You can either drop your inquiry in the mailbox or feel free to send us an email. And you can contact here, the email address is here. Let me make it a bit bigger. We also share it in the chat box. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Shanta, for your sharing. I believe the guides and resources provided will come in handy for our participants in their sustainability journey. And you can actually access it all in our chat box. Our tech team has sent it there already. Okay, before we move on to our next agenda, let's have a poll session right now, just to understand and get to know a little bit more about each other in terms of how familiar we are in our sustainability journey and our science-based targets, or where our organization is right now. Okay, could we get everyone to answer the poll? We'll give it another minute just so everyone have a chance to take part in the poll as well. We'll flash the answer at the end of the session today. All right, I believe most of us have answered the poll already. So thank you everyone for participating in the poll. Moving on, allow me to introduce to you Jess Yeo, who is the lead research and advocacy for UN Global Compact Network, Malaysia and Brunei, who will be sharing more information in regards to the science-based target. Over to you, Jess.
Okay, thank you, Kylie. Let me just pull out my screen. Oops. Okay. Okay, so hello again, my name is Jess. Today I'll be giving you a brief overview on the science-based targets. So there's 3 parts to my talk. Firstly, why the SBT? Second is what is SBT? And finally, how do you set a SBT? Oops, sorry. Okay, so basically the impacts of climate change have been communicated by scientists for the longest time. And finally, the world has reached a breakthrough in the 2015 Paris Agreement, when close to 200 national governments have committed to limit global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees, while pursuing efforts to limit temperature rise to 1.5 Celsius. So the IPCC report, which was released in 2018, made a very strong case on the need to limit warming to 1.5 degrees and highlighted the multiple risks if the Earth reaches beyond a 1.5 degrees warming. So fast forward to this year, the latest IPCC report, which was released about 2 weeks ago, made a strong case that global warming is unequivocally caused by human greenhouse gas emissions, and warming is actually happening faster than scientists have thought. So our initial target to actually limit global temperature rise to 1.5 might even fail miserably, and we may reach a 1.5 degrees world in less than 10 years, which is by 2030, within our lifetime. So it's scary, but however, there's hope. And the report stated clearly that the only way to slow down or reverse warming is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to zero, and basically steep cuts in greenhouse gas has to happen right now. So the general rule to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius is that global emissions need to be halved by 2030, and the world has to reach net zero by 2050. So there's no time to delay, and there's no room for excuses. The awareness is definitely growing in the recent years, and especially accelerated by COVID-19. And more governments are taking action as well as net zero pledges. So think of countries such as US, Japan, South Korea by 2050, and China by 2060. So everything is happening at the global level. And what does it actually mean to Malaysia? At UNGC MYB, as shared by Shanta, we recently launched our climate action guide for Malaysian businesses. So basically, one of the guide looks at the value case for companies to take climate actions. So I'm taking one snippet of the guide to show you. So for Malaysia, climate change poses an asymmetrical challenge. So on one hand, our impact on global emissions is very small. But on the other hand, our country and businesses are very vulnerable to the effects of climate change. For instance, sea level rise, floods, water stress, etc. So we are also impacted by transition risk as listed on the slides here. For example, changes in global regulation, as well as the rise in demand for sustainable financing and responsible sourcing. So our trade partners such as China and EU have definitely started to impose sustainability or low carbon expectations as preconditions for transactions with us. In the recently released report by Standard Chartered, it found that there's a potential loss in export revenue in Malaysia of close to 270 billion for Malaysian suppliers who actually fail to go green. So it is clear that sustainability is no longer a nice to have, but it's basically an imperative business consideration that is critical for long-term survival. Some companies definitely recognize the risks and opportunities that climate change has on their businesses, and they have definitely set targets to reduce their emissions. However, with this looming global goal of trying to cap temperature rise to 1.5 in order to avert the worst effects of climate change, most companies' targets are actually far from the timeline consistent with the 1.5 degrees goal. And this is where the science-based targets come in. So what are the science-based targets? SBT is an initiative developed by 4 founding partners. So there's CDP, UN Global Compact, WRI, and WWF. So the idea of SBT is to commit organizations to setting scientific, quantitative, and transparent short to medium-term targets at the pace that is required by climate science, which is to keep global temperature increase to 1.5 or at minimum a well below 2 degrees Celsius. So why the science-based targets? Currently, the SBTs are used by many companies, and the benefits are both internal and external. So it's more towards external, such as brand reputation and also a positive engagement with investors who are also increasingly demanding targets based on science-driven projections. And importantly, it also drives internal innovation and transform business practices, because the SBTs set a short, medium, and long-term ambitious target, which actually allows a company to think beyond the common solutions for greenhouse gas reductions. For example, looking at new technologies or any innovative financing options. So, and from a regulatory perspective, it actually future-proofs the organizations in terms of the transition risk happening from a climate perspective. So there's a strong business case in adopting the SBTs among investors as well as the private sector. There are also some national governments who are actually advocating for this. The UK government have set a requirement for potential sponsors of COP26 to have strong climate credentials as evidenced by SBTs. And the Japan government have also set official target of having 100 national companies with approved SBTs by 2020. So as of this year in March, 95 companies have already set targets. So in Malaysia, the recently updated Malaysia Code of Corporate Governance in April 2021 encourages quote unquote listed companies to evaluate their operations and set science-based emissions reduction targets to support cleaner and sustainable growth. So basically, with the push from regulators, we believe that science-based targets will eventually become a common language. So the momentum is definitely growing. A lot of progress are made by the SBTi, and it's accelerating so quickly that this graphic, which was used last year, is already outdated. So the latest numbers is there's 1,700 companies working with the SBTi to reduce their emissions. Over 800 have already have their targets approved. And total companies which have committed has a total of over 20 trillion in USD market cap, which is about a fifth of global stock market across 50 sectors. And some of the big companies that has joined last year include Amazon, Facebook, Ford, Apple, and Microsoft. So there's a growing number of SBT commitments in APAC, primarily driven by Japan and India. And Malaysia is still seeing relatively small numbers. And currently there's only 3 companies, such as Sarawak Energy, Taiwan, and Ramatex, which has committed to the science-based targets. And today we are privileged also to have everyone from Sarawak Energy in this session to share more about their experience in committing and setting the science-based target after my session. So in fact, Sarawak Energy is the first company in Malaysia that has committed to the highest level of ambition target setting for the science-based target, basically to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 Celsius. So although there are just 3 companies who have committed, we at UNGC are actually seeing more and more interest among companies who are engaging with us because they also want to set science-based targets. So, okay, I've spoken for so long. So what are the science-based targets? So the SBTi, it is derived from the Paris Agreement, which is built for governments and global economies. So the idea is, how do we translate what happens from a Paris Agreement into what is more relevant to the private sector? Through a methodological approach, which also will see how they contribute to the carbon budget that is being set. So it covers the most relevant scope, such as scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. I'll explain a little bit more later. And the time frame should be 5 to 15 years. And the target should be expressed in metrics that are relevant to the sector or the company. It is called science-based targets because obviously it is based on various science-led initiatives developed by actors within the climate science arena, such as the IEA, the IPCC, etc. So targets are known as science-based if they are in line with the goals required by the Paris Agreement, which is to limit global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees or at best 1.5. So this chart basically shows companies who commit to the SBTs are required to set 5 to 15-year targets and ensuring that it is reducing both direct as well as indirect emissions. So in other words, the SBT ensures that companies are not just setting net zero targets or just setting arbitrary targets, but they are actually setting targets as required by science. So in a nutshell, what is the SBTs? The SBT provides a clearly defined pathway for companies to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. It helps to prove future-proof business growth. As well, targets are considered science-based if they are in line with the Paris Agreement. And what's the difference between SBT as well as the other sustainability targets? It's actually based on climate science and projections of the Paris Agreement, which works on the carbon budget concept, and which is how much carbon is left to be emitted globally and for each country. And then the SBT then translate this policy speak into a private sector approach. And most importantly, the last sentence, it advocates doing what is necessary, not what is easy or convenient. So there's 2 buzzwords that corporates are hearing and will be hearing more in the future, which is TCFD and SBTi. So I put this slide here to show you how it actually complements each other. So the TCFD is founded by the Financial Stability Board, and it calls on companies to disclose their climate-related financial risk to investors, lenders, insurers, etc. So the 4 key areas that companies have to report against is governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. So there are many major reporting initiatives or frameworks that are increasingly aligning with the TCFD disclosures. For instance, the CDP Climate Change Questionnaire, UNPRI, etc. And even for Malaysia, the FTSE4Good is actually recalibrating to be more focused on TCFD indicators. So where does SBT actually fit in? So the SBT enable companies to meet the requirements of the matrix and targets of the TCFD recommendations. Through TCFD, companies are asked to disclose targets for managing climate-related risks and opportunities, as well as performance against those targets. And the SBT actually brings in the ambition component, whereby through the SBTI, companies can demonstrate that they are doing their bit in meeting the objectives of the Paris Agreement goal. So how can you set a science-based target? There are two routes to it. Firstly, for large companies, another one is for SMEs. SMEs, because the SBTI understands that SMEs are a big actor in the space and the need to engage with them. So the SME is a more simplified route. Today, we'll be talking about the route for large companies. And there's a process to this. Committing is just the first step in the SBTI journey. Subsequently, companies need to develop their SBTs, submit their SBTs to the SBTI for official validation. And basically, between the day they commit to the point of their communication, they are given 24 months, which is 2 years, to produce their plan as well as to get verified. And then they will have to communicate their target once it is validated. And then companies would have to disclose their progress on an annual basis based on their baseline. So there are several pathways to commit to the SBTs. Companies can choose either a 1.5 degrees or a well below 2 degrees target. And I'll share a little bit more about this. So once the company selects either a 1.5 or a well below 2 degrees target, they would have to start to develop the target. So before that, there is a bit of a technical concept to this. The starting point here, it always begins with the global carbon budget. So how much has the world emitted and how much can the world still emit? So the SBTI currently works with 2 climate scenarios as defined by the IEA and the IPCC. And the next question is, what are we going to do with the budget? So the budget is allocated across individual companies, across sectors, and this is where the SBT methods or the approach comes in. So there's 2 key approaches to that in the middle, which is absolute-based approach or a sectorial-based approach. And finally, the crucial point is that the company has to do some sort of specific profiling, which is to assess their individual carbon footprint, their activity data, how much emissions are produced today, how much are they planning to grow over the target's time frame. So all of these will shape how their SBT will look like. Okay, so this is one of the more important slides when we talk about the SBTI. But firstly, the idea is how do you set an SBT? So one thing to get out away up front is to address the key terminologies, which is the scope 1, scope 2, and the scope 3, because it actually underpins a lot of expectations structured around the SBTI. So for the SBTs to work, companies need to understand their emissions impact. So they would have to calculate their emissions in line with the greenhouse gas protocol. So the greenhouse gas protocol put emissions into 3 different buckets on the left-hand side. Basically, scope 1 is the direct emissions from company operations. And scope 2 is purchased electricity, steam, and water. And scope 3 is basically a whole broad universe of emissions across the value chain. And the most important table you are seeing is on the right-hand side. It basically pre-calculates how much emissions to reduce based on target ambition. So there are 3 emission scenarios the SBT look at. The 2 degrees, the well below 2 degrees, as well as the 1.5 degrees Celsius. So basically, the 2 degrees is for the scope 3. So let's say the minimum level of ambition for scope 1 and 2 targets are actually the well below 2 degrees Celsius on the second row. So for example, for an absolute-based approach, if your company wants to align with the well below 2 degrees scenario, they need to reduce absolute carbon emission by 12.5% in 5 years, 25% in 10 years, and 37.5% in 15 years. So on average, they would have to reduce their annual reduction rate by 2.5%. So as mentioned, we definitely highly encourage companies to align with a 1.5 degrees warming scenario, which then translate to a 4.2% linear annual reduction rate, LARR. So to summarize, companies can only select a 1.5 or a well below 2 degrees Celsius for scope 1 and 2. SBTi understands that scope 3 is challenging aspect for corporates, and there is definitely leeway provided there. So let's say if more than 40% of total emissions is from scope 3, then the company needs to set a science-based target. If not, they can actually choose to discount it from their SBT target setting. So after setting target, the last two steps is when targets are validated, companies must communicate targets via the SBTi website or also other partners' website. And finally, to publicly disclose emissions inventory and progress against their baseline every year. It can be through annual reports, sustainability reports, etc. Okay, so finally, I would like to end with a call to action. Basically, I would like to invite everybody here to be part of the UNGC Business Ambition for 1.5 degrees. This is the most ambitious program we have for climate action. When a company joins this, it means that they have to set targets in line with a 1.5 degrees future, which is what Sarawak Energy is doing. So net zero essentially is the longest stretch goal, and 1.5 is the pathway for you to achieve it. This is also an official part of the UNFCCC Race to Zero campaign as well. So to learn more about the SBT, you can visit our UNGC Academy e-learning course. It's free for you, and it's also just a short, like 30 minutes. So I believe the link will be shared in the chat box here. So with this, I will end my sharing, and thank you everyone for listening. Thank you. Bye-bye. Back to you, Kylie.
All right, thank you, Jess, for your insightful presentation. We hope the presentation gave everyone an overview of science targets companies can benefit from embarking on this journey and the existing opportunities that come along. If you have any questions, don't forget to drop them in the Q&A box. So, ladies and gentlemen, next we have Mr. Muhammad Irwan Aman, the head of sustainability from Sarawak Energy Berhad. As just previously mentioned, Sarawak Energy is actually the first company in Malaysia to commit to the SBTs and the 1.5 degrees business ambition, which also aligns to the Paris. Without further ado, let's talk Mr. Muhammad Irwan. Over to you, Irwan.
All right, thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you, Jess, for that detailed what we call explanation about SBTi. So I'm coming from industry. So today I would like to just share our journey, our experience into science-based targets from an industry perspective, how we look at science-based targets, how we look climate change issues as a main issues to drive first in further innovate in the way we generate power, the way we operate, and the way we look at the future risks of climate change. All right, for Sarawak Energy, I think just to look at how we define sustainability, it's all about strategic approach to long-term materiality, risk and opportunity that's in creating values to all our stakeholders, leveraging from real business values. So whatever we do should be based on real business values, should be based on what material to us, and should be based on risk and opportunity. So this is our definition about sustainability, because it's important to give this context so that we are able to understand why is it important to us. Moving forward, before we go detail about SBT, how we look at SBT, it's important for us to recognize climate change definitely will have an impact to any business in Malaysia. All right, be it upstream or downstream of your business, definitely will impact it. And then it's also a part of commitment, for example, from the financier, our lenders. Once they commit to something, of course, the requirement will trickling down to their whoever lend from them. So for Sarawak Energy, we have identified what we call risks in climate change, how it impacts our business. The four main key risks would be impact on climate change to our power plant, to our generation operation. So one degree C increase in temperature, ambient temperature, we have an impact to our plant efficiency. So that can be translated into dollar and cent. For how our hydropower projects, how climate change impact. So all this tie up to projection so that we are properly better prepared in handling this issue. And then how climate change impact our infrastructure, our transmission line, our distribution, our substation, and so on. So that if possible, we would like to incorporate all this consideration in our design stage so that our substation or whatever infrastructure that we have resilient to climate change impact. And how climate change impact to power delivery, customer behaviors in what we call consuming energies, all this stuff. And then financial impact of climate change. Financial impact is also covers the requirement from our lenders, because we're involving, for example, hydropower projects involve huge investment. So the requirement from investors are very critical for us. So all this is the key risk. And then when we talk about risk, it's also offer opportunity. So it's important for us to have a clear approach and planning toward GHG reduction, mitigation, and adaptation. Important for us to adopt or to foster the adoption of low carbon technology, be it on the technical itself, on the hardware itself, but also on policy. How we can proactively talk to the government and how we can push the climate change agenda forward, increasing adoption of destructive technology, improve our resilience, because resilient very important, because 78% of our energy coming from hydropower, so it's quite exposed to climate change. And then increase the integration of other renewable energy apart from hydropower, increase other green generation, and then GHG mitigation adaptation beyond power sectors. So how we can play that role, all this opportunity to us. So this is the risk that we see for our business, Sarawak Energy, then how we look at the opportunity. And then going a bit detail on the science-based targets. If you look at the sectoral decarbonization approach, all right, this is the path that been drawn, 2 degrees C, dotted green line, and then 1.5 degrees C targets. This represent the grid emission intensity, the intensity for power sectors. So the targets by 2030 to reduce the grid emission to 1.5 degree, which is also translate into 1.5 kilogram CO2 per kilowatt hour generated. So this is the 1.5 degree C target, and of course toward 2050 there will be net zero. So it's important for us to understand this path. So this path will navigate us how we, number one, to create a business case for business, especially for us power utilities, create a business case for us, and for us to communicate to our top management, to our other stakeholders, be it internal. So where we are in terms of change. Before that, I'd just like to share the fundamental for us if we are talking about climate change. If you look at the graph here, in 2011, our hydropower project is only 15%. The rest of it dominated by thermal power plant. So you know, thermal power plant, the emission factors is higher. But since then, migrating from thermal or detaching ourselves from fossil fuel, we are able to reduce our grid emission intensity. In 2018, our energy generated from our hydropower projects has increased to 78%. So this basically a foundation, our journey toward decarbonizing our grid emission. So hydropower is renewable. So just less than 10 years, we're able to reduce more than 68% of our grid emission intensity. So this is the foundation of it. Of course, most of it coming from changing from thermal to renewable. So the question here is more on the supply side or the generation side, the power generation side. So what's next? All right. So we have done a lot in the generation side. So what's next to us? So in understanding this, so this is the Sarawak energy electricity emission intensity since 2000. I think we can't see it because we have a slide here. Since 2011, where we are before, and then we are tracking this emission intensity. So this is us. You can see it's going down gradually, but for global, if you took global average, it's about 0.5 ton CO2 per megawatt hour, or 0.45 kilograms CO2 per kilowatt hour. So this is the global average. Okay, so for how to link it to Paris Agreement targets. So under the Paris Agreement targets, below 2.5 degrees C, the electricity emission intensity, basically the target should be below 0.35 ton CO2 per megawatt hour. Right, we already achieved this in 2014 because our grid emission during that particular time, 0.335, so lower than 2 degrees C targets. And then where we are now, if you look at 2020, we are at 0.205 ton CO2 per megawatt hour. So still above 1.5 degrees C, but that's why signing to the 1.5 degrees C pledge is important to us, so that's provide another driver for us to reduce below 1.5 degrees C. So that's where we are, how we look at our business, our contribution toward the Paris Agreement. And then the significance of this should not only focus on the generation side, but what's next from the supply side or going downstream of our business process. All right, as I mentioned earlier, most of the achievement we achieve at the power generation side or the supply side, increasing of renewable energy. But signing to SBTI, providing us another driver to look at other scope 2 and scope 3. So basically, how we should be monitoring our building, office consumption, electricity consumption, and scope 3 that also talk about our supply chain. It's important for us to have this, and then SBTI providing that tool to us to really talk about this and then monitoring it. So basically talking about SBTI, the commitment, how we're going to achieve GHG reduction. It's all about, it's nothing new basically. It's all about operation excellence. It's all about productivity, efficiency, and innovation. So we need to improve the way we operate, the way we do our business through innovation. So only that will result to GHG reduction. So we need to look at GHG reduction or CO2 reduction, not only as environmental issues, but also a platform for us to improve our processes. All right, this is a commitment, a milestone to us, where the top management agreed to sign to the business ambition 1.5 degrees C. We're back in July 2020, last year. So we have another year to finalize our targets and get it validated and disclose it. All right, where we are now, I think Jess already explained to you the detailed part of it, what need to be done if we are what we call commit to what to 1.5 degrees C, and then under 1.5 degrees C, we need to adopt science-based targets. How we're going to reduce our emissions? I think number one, signing the commitment letter by our CEO. That's done, and then establish emission reduction targets. We are in the midst now. So where are we? We are here basically. We in the process of establishing emission reduction targets, not only for scope 1 but scope 2 and scope 3. Just share with you that scope 3 is not that easy. It's not that straightforward. A lot of effort need to be put in on the concepts and to communicate with stakeholders, for example, our supply chain, our vendors, and so on. And then after that, we should be validating our SBTI targets. And of course, after that, we'll be communicating and disclosing. So we are here at this moment. So hope our target is to finalize it by end of this year or next year, so that we can disclose our targets. Basically, talking about this, there are a lot of data gathering involved, data validation. It's not a lot of effort need to be put in. So our approach is basically, because we are also doing sustainability reporting. Under this reporting, all the key indicators, we are sending it for third-party assurer. So what we're going to do before we finalize our targets to get all this indicator assured by third party. This process is ongoing, where we are doing third-party assurance for our main grid, northern grid. This is every year we appoint third-party assurer to validate this. And then number 10, the one highlighted in red, number 10, scope 2 and scope 3. So these the figures that we are asking the assurer to go through, whether in terms of uncertainties, completeness of the data, what else we need to improve in terms of data governance. So we are sending we are appointing assessors to assess this or to assure these indicators. Only then this will be a basis for us to communicate to the management what's the quantum, as just mentioned, whether linear or not. So what sort of commitment we're going to commit ourselves, so that whatever way forwards that we are recommending to the management will be practical enough. So this is our approach to science-based target. Expanding to our supply chain, I think we have this in the pipeline for quite some time, since end of last year. We would like to also bring in our suppliers to work together with us to subscribe science-based target, to subscribe to what we call sustainability practices or mindset. So hopefully we can proceed with this. There are several discussions been done. So what we plan to do is to get our vendor in for them to just do a bit of reporting on their consumption, their carbon footprint, and so on. Maybe get them familiar with and report it to us. And then maybe next phase 2, third and fourth year, we can introduce targets reduction from their side. So hopefully we can implement this so that we are going beyond how we are able to influence our supply chain. All right, I think by having science-based target, it's important for us to have a discussion, discuss about what else we can do in terms of climate change, what's practical for us, what's practical for the industries, how this can propel us to the next level. Again, SBTi should be also a platform for us to discuss about driving low carbon technology. I think this is what we have in Sarawak Energy. We have 2 hydrogen cars. We have EV cars and EV scooters. First electricity bus in Kuching. So I think all this is based, although it's still in pilot projects, but it's all about understanding the technologies and how this can support the state agenda of green economy and green or circular economy and so on. And then we have the first integrated hydrogen production plant and refueling station. So the energy used for this plant is coming mainly from hydropower. So it's renewable. So that's why we have all the fundamental to move forward in these areas. The REC, right, for Batang Air HEP, and then the 50 megawatt floating solar in one of our hydropower projects. Yes, it's part of the supply side. And then try to link it to other requirements, because I think now ESG or sustainability has become main requirement from investors. Previously, we can see this for international investors only. But now the local investors starting to put all this requirement in, since Bank Negara issued the taxonomy on climate change. A lot of banks start putting all this requirement, even our existing investors. So under this sustainable linked loan, basically the criteria is we need to meet all agreed what we call sustainability indicators or sustainability performance, our grid emission, and then rural electrification. Once we achieve that, only then we will enjoy a discount in our loan. All right, as for my conclusion, CO2 reduction targets, as a corporate, we should not look this as environmental issues, okay? It should be the question we should ask ourselves, how we can become more efficient in our process. With a similar input, how we can to increase the output of it. Okay, for step one, be it SME, be it corporate, screen your business activities and start talking about where we can reduce our carbon footprint. That also basically the outcome of efficiency and cost saving initiative within SME or corporate. Start gathering data or relevant data, basically to build a business case. So once you have a solid business case in moving forward, I think you have a bigger chance to get management approval. As I mentioned earlier, science-based target promote awareness, discussion on innovation to reduce carbon reduction, basically from carbon reduction lens. I think in general, to conclude everything, business landscape is changing, ESG getting more and more traction to this. So either you need to improve the way you look at things and the way you operate. I think is to prepare yourself basically. All these requirements definitely will be one of the main requirements for loans in the future. I think for us it's even critical because most of our projects involve billions kind of investment. We need to be sustained. We need to demonstrate that we're able to develop a project in a sustainable manner. I think that's all for my sharing session for this morning. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Iwan. Great insights and expertise from you. We really appreciate Energy as our very valued member who has supported and contributed to UNGC and YB's journey. We also see them as a sustainability benchmark for Malaysian corporates and beyond. We hope that the sharing earlier was useful and inspired everyone here to start their climate journey through setting science-based targets. Before we have our last agenda for today, our Q&A session, let's have a look at the poll that we did earlier. May we get the results? All right, so is your organization currently considering the impact of climate change risks and opportunities? Most of the participants answered yes, so good job to everyone. Okay, are we familiar with science-based targets for climate change? Majority answered no and not sure. So thank you for attending today's webinar and learning about science-based target as well. Okay, I'll skip the rest of the poll because we only have 5 more minutes and we would like to move on to our Q&A session. Again, if anyone here have questions that you would like to have clarified, please feel free to leave it in the chat and we will try our best to answer them. Okay, maybe we can have this answered by Irwan. When defining targets and approach to reach targets, and especially when companies depend bet on not yet established or common solutions, can you please share how SBTI balance the risks when approving targets and dependencies? Irwan, may I invite you to answer this?
Yeah, let me try to understand the question first. Is it carbon storage, carbon CCS? I'm not too sure. CCS referring to what? Common, is it carbon sequestration or can we check if I balance the risk? In fact, everything is, we need to look at how it's about risk and opportunity, right? Even the standards, what sort of standards we should be adopting should be based on what standards that can support you in your journey. That's why Sarawak Energy, we start off with GRI, and then we TCFD now, we are going for TCFD because we know that this standard able to support us in our journey. Of course, it's tied up to the management direction as well. So we know that, okay, this is where we are going now. What sort of standards that able to support us in this? Of course, if you adopt all standards, then it will be difficult for you to really understand it and how it can support your journey. It's all, again, balancing the risks when approving targets and the dependency. So I think that my response, it should be balanced. And then you need to look at the risk and opportunity, not only risk and opportunity, but whether it's practical enough for you. All right, be it your target 1.5 degrees C, if you are not sure whether you can achieve it, then there's a risk as well. So let's go through the whole business consideration, whether it's practical enough or whether management need to put extra resources a bit so that management can understand why they are putting extra resources in that. I think that's my response. Right. Kelly,
thank you so much,
question,
Irwan.
yeah.
Maybe we can move on to the next question. To Irwan from Javin Tan, which of the 4 risks you highlighted is the key motivation for Sarawak Energy to venture into this journey?
Yeah, I think the first key risk would be the financial impact of climate change. Financial impact in terms of operation, as I mentioned earlier, not many look at climate change as a risk. Most of it look at climate change as environmental issues. But if you look at, for example, the science part of it, with the increase of 1.1 degrees C, for example, in ambient temperature, will impact our power plant efficiency. All right, with high precipitation, that will impact our hydropower projects. Droughts also impact our hydropower projects. In power delivery, increase of one degree ambient temperature will increase the resistance of our transmission line. So that's what we call transmit or turn into losses, what we call transmission and distribution losses. This is losses that we can't recover. So that's one. Second is financial impact to our future projects, because investors starting putting all this requirement in, how hydropower can be can adapt to climate change, how we can build a resilient hydropower. Resilient mean it will be, we are preparing for climate change, and then how this can also provide adaptation measures, for example, water supply, for example, biodiversity conservation, for example, in the catchment areas. So I think respond to your point. To me personally, discussing with all the business owners about risk, I think the number 4 is the main one. Javin, thank you for that.
All right, thank you so much, Irwan. I think our time is limited, so we only got to answer 2 questions so far. But I think we can answer your questions through email again, because it's already 12 and we're ending our session today. So thank you so much again, Mr. Irwan, for attending to our questions. I believe your sharing has benefited everyone in certain ways to embark on this journey. We would also like to thank all our partners, British Malaysian Chamber of Commerce Berhad, Institute of Corporate Directors Malaysia, Malaysian Dutch Business Council, and Malaysian German Chamber of Commerce and Industry for their support in this webinar. So this session is now coming to an end, and we hope all of you received the insightful details you needed. But before I end this, I just want to let everyone know that you will receive a notification from Zoom once you leave this session to participate in the survey. With this, I would like to thank everyone again for attending our session. Please do email us if you have any other questions that you would like answered further. Stay home, stay safe, and have a great day, everyone.